This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MTG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MTG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
Alrighty guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. Going to be giving our take on something that might seem a little out of the ordinary, and that is a kind of under-the-radar announcement for MTGO. And while we typically don't discuss MTGO finance, this may have somewhat of an impact on the paper scene that both of us believe for different reasons.
Yep.
So the announcement was basically that the return of unlimited tokens is coming. What they said was, we're returning next Wednesday for 2 weeks. Next week's blog will cover all the details, blah, 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 blah. So basically, I have my opinion on it. Reptar has his, and let's go ahead and get started.
So I love the idea of this for Eternal Weekend because in the year of COVID, because that allowed people to play MODO, and it solved a problem that I've believed existed for a very long time, and it was shifting your collection from paper to digital. Why do you need to pay into it twice? You were able to extract from MODO to paper for a while, though they've been trying to dial that back. And this token allowed you to do that for these events. And it was everything during Eternal Weekend. And I think Gen Con as well also got one of these. And all you had to do was just say, hey, I want to play in an event. You got the token for the weekend, and then you could just run it for every event that happened that weekend if you wanted to join. And this kind of piqued my interest because to me it meant if they could do it in a limited window, that means it could be done permanently. And it really, at that point, to me, triages most of the problems that WotC has with MODO as an application when you look at it from the standpoint of that dual collection, as well as extracting paper cards from MODO, the set redemption, which WotC has been trying to sunset since Amonkhet. So, to me, as a player who does not have a MODO account, I like this idea. But when I first broached it with you, I looked at it as kind of a negative because why wait this long to fucking do this?
I mean, I think that's stupid too. I also think, and this is, I never thought I would say this, and anyone who's been following the cast for any length of time knows that Legacy is my absolute favorite format. Just make this permanent and officially announce that you are killing Legacy. You've taken us to dinner 5 times now, and you go to get the car and you leave us standing there. You drive off in the car. And for whatever reason, we keep going to dinner with you, expecting you to take us somewhere nice after dinner. And it's not happening.
Nope, never.
Just make it permanent. Yep. I think that, like you said, this is almost, it's the closest thing you get to the Pokemon system, where you buy the pack, you scan the code, you get the cards online from the pack. And I think that that's been incredibly popular, and I think that making these all-access tokens a permanent subscription model would be great.
Yep.
Fine. I still have to pay event entry. I still have to do all that other stuff. I don't care.
Nope.
I just think that this type of thing is a good way for them to say, you know what? We can worry about Arena later, and we don't ever have to add Legacy or Modern or Vintage or any of those formats to Arena. That's just going to be standard and historic. Great. Cool. Go.
Yep.
And that's all you have to do with it. And you can just say, all right, we're going to do all of our Eternal formats on MODO. Cool. We don't like them anyways. Admit it.
Yeah.
Sure, those cards probably crash in value. And you know what? Most of the people I know that play Legacy as players think that's fine. They just want to play the format. They just can't. Vendors, the cards that most vendors hoard from those formats are cards like dual lands that have EDH utility anyways. Other than that, they're just churning those as constantly as they can. So I don't really think there's much of a loss there for them either. Maybe I'm wrong. Just my 2 cents. Sorry, my little rant.
No, it's good because you and I fundamentally agree. We just think about what happens in paper differently, like you mentioned at the top of this. I, as a Legacy player and somebody who's tried to play Vintage a few times, I want more people to be able to enjoy those formats in any way they can. digitally, paper, however you want to.
Yeah, whatever it is, doesn't matter.
Including myself. And I've been saying for years, if I had a way to take my paper collection and digitize it, I would snap at that so I could actually play these formats online, because I don't want to rebuy everything. But if it becomes a subscription model and I can pay X dollars a month like I do to some other services or games and play these old formats because I have this token that allows me to, then yeah, by all means, charge me for it. I don't have to deal with cracking packs or winning tickets, whatever the hell it takes to get the shit from bots. And who cares about that economy at this point? Like, mono traders, etc., disappears, but at that point, your ecosystem is really just formats supported by the token and drafts. And if you still allow people to win packs from these events, that means they can go into the drafts with those packs. It's really not the most difficult financial problem to solve in regards to the MODO ecosystem. It removes bots, which have been kind of a sore spot for WotC for a very long time, because it technically is against EULA, despite the fact that these people do use virtualization software and run like real accounts, multiple or stacked accounts on this software. They clip that. And you just remove set redemption as a whole, because that kind of creates this weird finance game for WotC around MODO, where they just have to have these sealed sets sitting in a warehouse for I don't even know how many more months after a set is officially finished. It's like maybe 6 additional months you have to redeem your full set, foil or not, right now.
Yeah.
And they can announce the end of that as well and just make this entirely a digital product with a small subscription model. And that's perfectly fine, because at no point in time is WotC not taking money from people that play on this client. You can let people run it for free if they just want to draft and kind of go infinite the way they are, or with whatever they have, and it's perfectly fine. You just let people buy draft or event tickets as needed, like you said, and I think that's perfectly okay. In regards to how it reflects into paper, I don't see it crushing paper, because we don't really have these events anyway, and where you do, it's kind of, as we said for a while, these hotbeds that just never really cool. And people are going to play in those hotbeds, and it doesn't really deter people from entering the format. It makes it more approachable, and I don't think it's going to spike prices necessarily, but it could push a few more people into these older formats once they're able to get over the hump of, oh, well, this format is too advanced for me, it's too difficult, there are too many decisions. And then on top of having to learn it, I've got to buy all these cards.
Yeah, I have to pay $5,000 for a deck. And I think that, you touched on something key there with more eyes on the formats, because if you can just get in for $15 and, hotbeds are hotbeds, Eternal Weekend's going to happen, Gen Con's going to happen, whatever. You get some people in for, 15, 20, 30, whatever. The price is a month, a year, doesn't matter. And they like it, well, maybe then they actually try to build those paper decks to try to go to these Eternal Weekends, to go to Gen Con, because they hear how great it is, because it's a bunch of us old curmudgeons just drinking till we can't see straight and playing Magic.
And if anybody thinks that isn't what those events are about, you are wrong.
Oh, boy, are they. And I think that that's a key component, too, is that one of the biggest things that people complain about that I have heard, seen on the internet everywhere, is obviously the existence of the reserve list, the price restriction, whatever. This gives those people a way to try the format out to see if they actually like it first before they decide if they want to make a commitment to it.
Absolutely.
And if they, if we don't, doesn't matter. You can still play it all day online. Cool. And if anything, it may bring some more liquidity to some of those cards that, are basically legacy staples, like your Stone Forges, stuff like that isn't necessarily liquid because of EDH, but, has value. And maybe that's better. Maybe that actually does bring more value to it.
Yeah.
And I think for one of the few times, this is a hashtag WotC internet joke that I hope they make permanent, because it's a good thing, and I hope they bring it back, because I think that this is the type of thing that is just incredible value for everybody.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's any reason why if given the option to not pay for the token because you already own the cards, why players would dislike this just existing in the background, because like I said, it doesn't really affect the ecosystem overall. The only thing you have to contend with as WotC is you have to ensure that your rate is less than the lending services that exist. If you charge more than the lending services do, you'll never sell these. There's that bit to it. You can't give away enough stupid frills on MODO to make people want to pay more money over, mono traders or something. Like, cool, I have another avatar, whoop-de-poop. its force of will this time instead of
Oh
like
boy.
a Birds of Paradise or Squeak.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to cut it, right? That's probably the biggest financial hurdle for them. And I'm hoping, like you said, that this is really just the test run to a longer solution, because I don't understand how this application survives without doing that, because people are going to attrition off to Arena over time, as that's where Standard moves, that's where Historic moves, and if those remain the formats to play in Paper, all you will have left are the people that are playing these older formats and either will or won't care about the subscription model. They're not going to sit around and crack packs they bought from you for this stuff.
Absolutely not.
That's the big thing. And prior to the cast, we talked about it. There's some oddities with MODO that can't be solved with packs. Rishadan Port, super expensive on MODO until it was treasure chested, just because it was
Renin
vintage
6
Masters.
was another one.
Yep, Renin 6.
Force of Negation too.
Yep.
It's just stuff that just due to low supply or a product that didn't exist on MODO is like the reverse of Paper.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas most of MODO, everyone goes to Underground Sea. Underground Sea is perpetually like $10 on MODO for one. Great. It's 500 Paper, and that's like, oh, well, you should just go to this model. Well, there's downsides, but I think that giving this token solves that.
Yeah.
And I think that I am hoping that a bunch of people sign up for this, a bunch of people do it, and all of a sudden they're like, all right, yep, this is our thing now. We're doing the thing. Oh, yeah. Here's your subscription model. Arena doesn't work on your phone because you need a new phone and it's bad code anyways, but you can play bad code with old cards and it'll be fun.
Yep. You can just run an emulator in MODO. It takes nothing. Yeah. And there does exist the boon for Paper Magic when you look at decks that have come out of MODO or formats that have come out of MODO to Paper. And again, pre-cast, we were talking a little bit about, as I was extrapolating my idea up to something a little more broad, I first thought, okay, were there any cards I could point at on MODO that were sleepers until noted and then popped in Paper? And it really came down to KCI was the first deck that I could think of that was difficult to play on MODO because it's a lot of clicks, but a lot of the intricacy for that deck was learned on MODO. So you played it on MODO before it was, things were banned. First, learn how the deck operates, and then you play it in Paper. At that point in time, Modern was also a pro format, so you had a handful of pros on it already. So as it gets more looks on MODO and a couple of looks in Paper as pros were playing it for the first GP in that season, because Matt Nash ran it for like 4 to 6 GPs in a row, that deck started to pop in Paper from MODO results. Then around the release of Thassa's Oracle, we talked about Adnaz in Modern, which was a pick of ours, and Doomsday, both benefiting from the card Thassa's Oracle. Well, at that point, Modern and Legacy weren't really being played in Paper. It was Pioneer, Historic, and Standard. Those cards saw a ton of play on MODO, results started coming through, and then everything starts to pop in Paper. And there does exist that opportunity that as more people are able to play Modern and Pioneer, because they have these tokens, they don't have to worry about renting or buying, etc., these cards on MODO, that we do see some of these translated results from MODO affecting Paper prices, because people are going to be shifting to these cards when they're able to play again in Paper and they need them. And
I think it's just it is an indication, I hope, of the direction they're going in, because I think it's a direction that they can go in that solves some PR problems for them.
Oh yeah, that too. Yep.
It makes the reserve list argument a little bit better, because you can say, look, we've got this. This is great.
Yep.
You can play here. And it also allows WotC to kind of be like hands off and be like, hey, Card Titan, you want to do Eternal Weekend like 3 times a year for a GP? Run it.
Yeah.
Here's the software. Do it.
Or Star City can put Legacy back at some of their multi-day events too this way, because all it takes is one token.
Yep. I just think that I think it is overall not just good for the MTGO health of the metagame.
Yep.
I think it financially, if this becomes permanent, it's good. Short term, obviously, doesn't do anything. It's just 2 weeks of being able to fire Legacy and Vintage.
Yeah.
Great.
It is what it is, but we're we're both hoping for the long haul. I'm also the kind of person that just wishes they would leave Vintage Cube up all year long so I could play that. And if they did both of those, if they gave me tokens so I could play any format I wanted and left Vintage Cube up all year long, I would probably live in MODO.
Yeah, and just rotate through what kind of Vintage Cube it is. Fine, you can do Vintage Cube Prismatic, Vintage Cube EDH, whatever. Don't care. Or bring Rochester Draft.
Yeah, Supreme was a fun format as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
Like, I love cube content. It's some of my favorite content out there. Like,
great.
More so than EDH. I love watching people cube draft on MODO because it helps me curate my own cube, and like those games are just super fun.
Yeah, they are.
I know. This is probably something we'll keep abreast of and let people know as it comes through because it does, interest us, and I'm sure there are a number of other people who are interested in this as well, and it impacts a lot of people in our ability to play Magic. Because the other thing is, people are playing EDH by webcam because they don't own these cards in paper. Well, guess where you can play EDH permanently if you have this token. So,
MODO.
Yep, it is. I know, right? Just gimme. Me likey breadsticks. Me likey breadsticks.
Right.
But quick topic overall, just because this is a wait and see kind of thing. But it is good to keep abreast of this. It does offer a lot. You want to take your pick for the week, Kraken?
Yes.
All right.
So my pick is Reflection of Lityara. Card just got spoiled a couple days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's spoiler seasons. Everyone losing their minds over all the cool stuff that's out there. Oh, here's this awesome new card. I can't wait to see this. It's going to be great. Sure. Awesome. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this card is good for multiple reasons. So it is a 5-mana enchantment, which screams casual player anyways.
Mm-hmm. As
it comes into the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, cast that spell.
Or copy
Tribes
that spell.
are great. Or copy that spell, yes, right. Copy that spell. Tribes are great. So casuals love tribes. Changeling exists.
Yes.
We know that elves, fish, slivers, all kinds of prismatic stuff exists, and we're getting more and more tribes every year. We got cat generals finally, and a bunch of cards spiked. We got mongrel and dog generals, and a bunch of cards spiked. This is one of those cards that if you're in a 5-color tribal deck, you're going to want this in here because it doubles all of your creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, pre-orders on Miniature Market are about $350. So this card is something that I see following a similar price trend to something like Smothering Tithe, an absolute rock star in EDH. Now, I think the interesting thing worth noting here is Smothering Tithe, when it came out and the set launched, your low was around $4.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a few months later, because released in January for Ravnica Allegiance, it was the early set that year. By April, the card had doubled in price on low to $7 to $8. Then we gradually tick up for a few months. In May, we hit about $12. And then just recently, a year after release, we're hitting $20 on this card. So Reflections of Lityara is the type of thing that I can see, you know what, I'm going to get as many as I can at $3.50.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think long-term, this card in a few months hits a double up just from casual EDH. I think you see much more of that Smothering Tithe pattern because that's kind of become the standard with your EDH staples now. Yeah. You go back to Kaladesh and you have a card like Panharmonicon that took 6 months to, almost a year in some cases with Paradox Engine and stuff like that to really see an uptick in its price. That window's a lot shorter now. And I think that this is going to be one of those cards that you're going to just see it in a booth at $10 and not blink an eye.
Yep.
You're going to see it in a deck list at $10 and not blink an eye. Saffron Olive, Command Zone, someone is going to make a tribal list with this that's just hey, here's my dumb samurai deck, and you're going to love it. Or, samurais aren't blue, but whatever blue tribe.
Not yet. I'm going to point something out and not in regards to samurais, but this set has become a little more tribal than we thought. We got the World Tree, which looks to sacrifice gods, and today, or we got, or maybe yesterday, we got Maskwood Nexus.
Yeah.
4 CMC artifact. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So previous to this, I believe the first card that did this was Conspiracy. Then they printed 2 different enchantments in blue that did the same thing. This is the first time that they have kind of removed the color restriction from this effect, and it powers up every other card that plays off of creature types. So Maskwood Nexus is super unique in this situation, and Reflections of Lityara kind of like comboing, so to speak, with Mask is super helpful when you can just play whatever you want across all 5 colors. You don't need to just limit yourself now to the particular color pattern of whatever general you're playing, and that's it. So if you're going to play Samurai, you'd be like white and red, so you need some random Boros general. Or if you're playing dragons, you're probably looking at Jund. I mentioned on Twitter kind of jokingly, but I really think this is going to be the case. You just play Sliver Overlord as your general. That's all 5 colors. With Mask now, every creature in your deck is every creature type, which means everything is also a Sliver, so you just go fish. Sliver Overlord, You pay 3 and you go fish. And Reflections of Lityara lets you do some really dumb things because Sliver Overlord is an incredible enabler for this kind of stuff. And it's one of the best 5-color generals for this. You can look at Morphon, you can look at Godos, etc. Or Golos, not Godos. Godo is a bad card. That are these great 5-color generals. Somebody joked about Reaper King, etc. Like you just play 5-color great stuff now, and Reflections fits into that perfectly because you can play some of the most absurd cards across your desired tribe, or even outside of your desired tribe, like a light splash into something else.
Yeah.
And it's going to just be this powerhouse card in whatever you're doing. And I liked less Reflections to begin with. I thought it was really interesting and kind of cute. I was like, this is a really interesting way to riff on Riku of the Two Flames, which allows you to copy creatures or spells as you cast them. And then we got Mask, and it is just insane. Reflections is just insane. So, I like the pick. Overall, I agree that this is just going to be a card that once whatever price tag it holds, you're just not going to bat an eye at over time. One of the things we did mention, and I don't know if people were able to see it, but there are 2 different arts for this. There is the set art and like a bundle art or something else, and we don't know exactly what the population of the alt art is going to be just yet because it's not alt frame, which leads us to believe it's not going to be in collector's boosters. So we'll kind of see on that.
There is also an extended art of it as well.
Yep.
However, this being one of the more casual cards, I think you're fine picking up the basic one, and it doesn't really matter. People are just going to need it to have it.
Agreed.
So.
Yeah. The people that are going to buy, these at first are going to be the ones that float the price of all the versions, and then you can either get in now, which I think is perfectly fine if you can get in around $350, or you can try and wait it out a couple of weeks after the set and hope it drops. But as you mentioned, Panharmonicon, it took a while to go up, but it started high.
Yeah.
It started at like a predicted price point where not for set release, but like that length of time that it was just flat until it started to go up. That was the predicted price.
Yep.
Before the spike. And so I think getting in now is on whatever version you feel like it is the way to go. Absolutely. We'll track the regular version because that'll be the most accessible, like we've talked about over the past couple of weeks. But this is just a slam dunk pick overall. It's just so good, non-limiting in what you're trying to do, and just feeds into the casual nature of the format.
Tribal, it's great.
Yeah. Also, to go back to the Sliver Overlord thing, when all your creatures are one type, it allows you to play lands like Sliver Hive, and some of these like there's the land that just casts like rogues, whatever, like all those lands that tap for chroma. But as long as they have a certain creature type, they all still work under a Maskwood Nexus. It doesn't matter which one you use. So if you're thinking like, oh, it's going to be difficult to cast all of my creatures in a 5-color deck like this, not really. You have a lot of options in front of you. It's going to be more difficult to cast your non-creature spells that require CMCs like that. It's going to be a delicate balance in your mana base, but it's really not much to worry about, especially if you play, the litany of 2 to 3 color lands that we have access to now. My card is a little bit different than yours overall. I'm sticking with a specific theme instead of just being wide open with tribal, and it is time reversal. Now, I'm picking this a little late. We are kind of 2 spikes away from where we should have been, but the last spike is kind of a false positive, and I've just been waiting on it to kind of course correct. So it spiked to Ikoria, and that was the Commander 2020 release where we got I never know how to pronounce this thing. YXRIS, the one that makes snakes when your opponents draw cards, right?
Ixris, I think. Yeah, whatever it is.
So it spikes and it drops back down, and we're about $1 up from where we were pre-spike, and I'm okay making this as a pick now instead of a $1 card, right? So time reversal is, another wheel. It's another tool in the kit. And when you look at the EDH rec data, it's pretty clear what this goes into overall. You've got generals that promote drawing as many cards as possible. In the Locust God, you have a bunch of Niv-Mizzets, and you have, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Cadele? 2 in Simic.
Cadele, yeah.
Yeah, 2 in Simic, add a colorless for each card you've drawn this turn. So obviously you just draw as many cards, make a ton of colorless mana. And then you have punishing generals like Nekasar and Urix, which I consider punishing because it triggers off of your opponent's doing a thing. So overall, these strategies are pretty clear cut. What you want to do with time reversal is, very obvious. It doesn't really extend itself to much else because it's not the greatest wheel effect. There are other options that are a bit better. So the Punisher strategies, like I mentioned, they're helmed by Nekasar, and they're in the minority of overall decks that play time reversal because they provide a lot of feel-bad moments in a fairly casual format. So you just kind of you acknowledge it, but you skip by it. It's not what's really pushing this. You're looking more at Spellslinger decks, which are your Mizzet decks, or decks that make creatures or want to go tall with Urix, the Locust God, or Shabraz, which is the shark bird, the Azor shark bird, right? And in those decks, as I mentioned, this is another tool in the kit. Urix is the card that actually breathes new life into time reversal. That was the spike around Ikoria because it was in the 2020 deck, and it fits exactly into the hold on, I'm drawn theme, and it is the newest general in the available pool. As a card overall, it does compete with other options in the space. As I mentioned earlier, the reason it's not as popular across the format as it could be is because there are cheaper options like Whirlpool Rider, which is also a creature, so it allows you to repeat, or cards that do more like Time Spiral, which untap your 6 lands. So it limits its adoption across the format, but within these strategies, it is a staple because it does exactly what it needs to. It's cheap in terms of CMC, and it's cheap in terms of price right now. So, these strategies generally always get a look, and WotC is always trying to promote them here and there, and we get a new general every couple of years. So overall in the format, it is limited in scope, but that scope is always increasing. Now, as I mentioned, in regards to timeline, we did miss the second spike around Ikoria, but while we're overpaying around $1 after the price retraction from the spike, we're fine getting in here. The reason I brought up on stocks the larger graph overall, and I'll bring it up again, is because I believe this is going to be the trend following this most recent course correction in price. It's going up again. This is why I jumped on this card almost a month after adding it to my list. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to probably take about 12 months to be able to get out of this card to buy list. This is just natural demand here. It's going to take 12 months because even though we got a brand new general, right, for this deck, the deck strategy overall doesn't change. A lot of the cards in the decks don't change. Urix just didn't breathe enough life into the strategy to really keep that spike up towards $4 or $5 alive. It retracted very quickly. That's why I think natural demand, 12 months. Between now and then, if we see anything come out, maybe we get a couple more cards that promote this, new generals, etc., we could see this pop faster, but I doubt it. I think this is a 12-month spec no matter what. And to park, $10, $20 here in a card that is most likely not going to be reprinted because they just have riffed on this several times since, and all those cards just go in the same deck. We are safe on this. It was reprinted once in 2012, and that was it. I don't think we're going to get it again.
I think the other interesting thing with this is it's the type of effect that they typically will print, obviously, in core sets.
Yes.
Something they like doing stuff like that there. It has had multiple opportunities where it would have fit in an EDH deck, and thus far we've kind of dodged that. I think that's interesting because it shows that there may be, for whatever reason, some reticence for them to include this type of thing in an EDH set. I also think that you touched on reasoning when you were talking about why the spikes happened. Excuse me, that are honestly kind of perfect, because when effects come in that want you to draw cards, that want you to do stuff like that, this is much more relevant and you're more likely to get eyes on it. It's also something that they have reiterated, I don't even know how many times now, in different forms. And they've reiterated since this card was printed in different forms.
Yes.
And typically, rather than go visit a prior iteration, they'll just say, all right, well, what's the next time twister, the next strictly worse time twister? How are we doing this? And just going from there.
Yep, I want to cite two perfect examples. So you mentioned printing it in core set. The last core set printing I can remember, and a card I looked up for comparison's sake, Days Undoing.
Yeah.
Two in a blue, it's the exact, almost the exact same thing. And it is, look up any one of those decks, it is in the list.
Yep.
Each player shuffles their hand into their library, draws 7 cards. If it's your turn, end the turn. So that's the additional on Days Undoing, right? Then the most recent printing that we have, the most recent riff on this, is in Modern Horizons with Echo of Eons. And they gave it flashback in that instance.
And
so when you cast it the first time...
idea.
Look, man.
Sorry.
I just want to pop my LED. Yeah, I just want to pop my LED and flashback Echo of Eons after playing a bunch of cards for Storm. It's easy clap game. But this is the riff that you're talking about. What is the next thing that we can do? Well, we can make Twister a 3 CMC card again if we give it flashback for 3. And you get around the 6 up front. And so that was to my point of they remake this, and this one suffers a little bit because it doesn't do as much as some of the other options, or it's a poor option because of how much it costs in comparison. But it is always part of the deck. And as you mentioned, the saving grace is that riff.
Yep.
If we see it again, there's opportunity in Time Spiral 2, unless that set is literally just Time Spiral again, which it kind of looks like it is, or Modern Horizons 2 for this. It's a little doubtful at this point in time that we get another Time Twister in a core set because it's been a minute since it's happened. But that's where they like to put goofy Time Twister and Time Walk effects sometimes.
Yeah.
I think, Time Warp was the last time we got one of those, but they did put it in the Ixalan Rival, or whatever the
Explorers box set or whatever that board game
exactly.
was, yeah.
And that reprint did tank the value of Time Warp for a bit, but it came right back. Yeah. So I expect these cards to be essentially, reprint proof as long as they literally do not put them in another core set, and even then they will come back in time because it just makes it more accessible, especially at Mythic. It's not really going to take it much below the $3 watermark that we're sitting at right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be very difficult to take it from $3 to $1 when it actually has a home. It is not a popular home, but it has a very well-defined home right now. And also, who knows, if you put it in a core set, that's more people looking at this card. It is 8 to 9 years old right now. And if you're not looking at these decks explicitly, you're kind of going to miss this card because it just kind of breezes through the format when you're not looking at these themes. Unlike, like I said, I mentioned Time Spiral and Whirlpool Rider. These cards are a little more ubiquitous in the format. They just shine a little bit brighter. But when you give it that reprint, people might start looking at this for other things. Like, Wheel of Fortune costs too much in my Blue-Red X deck, but I could play something that costs a little more overall, and it works just as well. It works alongside Reforge the Soul and some of the other cheaper options financially. It does present that opportunity, and at that point there's still organic demand, and it's still a card that goes up in price. It just takes longer, and that 12-month timeline turns into 18 or 24, what have you.
I think it's also the kind of thing that touches on something that, as a vendor, some people may overlook sometimes. Is that cards like this, even just like not as a spec, just as like this is something I may just want to have in like a bulk box at a booth.
Yeah.
Or I may want to make sure I always have stocked in my binders.
Yeah.
Because it's the kind of thing that people just browse and they realize they need. So it's good to always have that $3 mythic rare card in there to round out a transaction.
Exactly. Yeah. It's definitely a binder or bulk box kind of card right now. You're 100% correct on that. That's where I would expect to find this because these are not they are well-defined themes. They are not highly played themes right now. And
Yeah.
I think that's important to note. The moment that they are and this card gets a little more popular, it's going to be pulled out. And even if it still has a $3 to $5 price tag, you're not going to find it in those anymore unless they're played or what have you. So,
Yeah.
That's why I went with this card. I was just kind of chomping at the bit to get it off my list because it's been there for a month and it really was undeserving of this like
sludge that
shelving.
it's been. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I understand the spike for Urix. There was a lot of hype around that card that just never came through. This is not the only card that got hyped at that point in time. I didn't believe in it at all because it dealt with snakes and Snake Tribal is stupid for right now. Like you need Maskwood Nexus to support Snake Tribal so you can play better lords for your snakes. It's dumb. But that's how you improve Snake Tribal, is with non-snakes. And this didn't really work out. You can play Concordant Crossroads and Fervor and Anger till you're blue in the face and give your snakes haste, but you just can't really get the job done with a bunch of 1/1s and some 5 CMC lords. You're not getting there. And it was just this weird expectation that this card, that Urix would be better than the Locust God or Niv Mizzet or Talrand if you're playing a Spellslinger, mono blue Spellslinger, right? It's just, it didn't pop. It's sad, and so we just kind of have to wait for the cyclical nature of things where we do see another one of these generals come around, but in the meantime, we have organic demand finally back behind this card, raising the price. So,
pretty great.
Yeah, I hope so. Other than that, though, we have a new quick hits for this week that'll probably go out over the weekend, and we're going to try and get those out a little bit more. Something we discussed behind the scenes because finance isn't stale overall, but without a lot of events to go to and a lot of unique events to watch, there's not a whole lot of unique things that we can cover quickly behind the scenes with our quick hits. So we're going to try and get to some more of those on some less financial related topics. So you'll be hearing more from us. And I do have the follow-up interview with our guest from a couple of weeks ago who talked about with me what it was like to work at Troll and what all those positions were like, and the follow-up is going to be talking with her about what it's like to do all of that work now by herself. So stay tuned for that. But until next week, unless you've got something else.
Nada.
All right. We are at MTG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I don't know the name of that one.
I think it's just Google Podcasts.
I think so. And you can find me at Halt I Am Reptar on Twitter. You are
at Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you next week.